The tile was ice cold beneath my knees, and the sharp smell of bleach burned my nose as I scrubbed the bathroom floor with shaking hands. Behind me, her voice sliced through the silence, cold, calm, and full of warning. "If you ever tell him what happens in this house, you'll regret it." I kept my head down, blinking back tears, because I knew one wrong word could make everything worse. My fingers ached, my chest felt tight, and for a moment, I thought this was going to be my life forever. Then I heard it, footsteps near the front door. Not hers, not his. Someone had come home early. The lock turned, the door opened, and before anyone could stop it, the truth finally walked in. Before we get into this story, tell me, what city are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I always love seeing where you're watching from, so drop it in the comments. Hello, my name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old, and if you saw me now, sitting in a quiet, sunlit living room with a steady job and a life that finally feels like mine, you'd probably assume things had always been this way. Calm, stable, safe. But they weren't, not even close. There was a time when this house didn't feel like a home at all, when every hallway felt like a place I had to pass through quietly, carefully, like I didn't belong there. And the worst part? It used to be the one place I felt the safest. I didn't grow up afraid. I grew up loved. My mother made sure of that. She had this way of filling every room with warmth, even on the days when nothing seemed to go right. I still remember the sound of her laughter drifting through the kitchen while she cooked, or the way she'd call my name just to ask about my day, even when she was busy. She was the kind of person who made you feel seen, really seen. And my dad, he worked a lot. Long hours, late nights, endless calls. But whenever he was home, he tried. He really did. He'd sit at the dinner table with us, loosen his tie, and listen to every little story I had to tell like it was the most important thing in the world. Back then, we were a family. Not perfect, but real. And then, everything changed. It didn't happen slowly. It didn't give us time to prepare. One moment, life was exactly the way it had always been. And the next, it felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. Losing my mom didn't just break something inside me. It changed the entire structure of my life. The silence she left behind wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. The kind of silence that sits in the corners of a room and doesn't go away. For a while, it was just me and my dad trying to figure things out. He buried himself in work even more than before, and I learned how to stay out of the way. We didn't talk about it much, maybe because we didn't know how. Maybe because saying it out loud would have made it real in a way neither of us was ready to face. But even then, I never imagined things would get worse. I thought the hardest part was already behind me. I thought losing her was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. Because the day my dad decided to move on was the day everything I thought I understood about my own home started to fall apart. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple. Not perfect in the way movies make it seem, but steady, warm. The kind of life you don't realize is special until it's gone. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever really happened. The same families had lived there for years. The same trees lined the streets, and every house looked just familiar enough to feel like it belonged. Our home sat at the end of a small cul-de-sac, with a wide front yard my mom insisted on keeping perfectly trimmed, even when no one else cared that much. She used to joke that if the grass got too long, it would ruin the entire street's reputation. Inside, it always smelled like something fresh. Coffee in the mornings, baked bread in the afternoons, and sometimes lavender in the evenings when my mom would light one of her candles. It wasn't just a house. It felt alive. Like every corner held a memory, every room had a purpose. My mom was the center of all of it. She had this quiet strength about her. She wasn't loud or dramatic, but she didn't need to be. When she spoke, people listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She had a way of making even the smallest moments feel important. If I came home excited about something as simple as a good grade or a conversation with a friend, she'd sit with me like it was the highlight of her day. We had little routines that never changed. Sunday mornings meant pancakes, no matter what. She'd stand at the stove in her soft gray sweater, flipping them perfectly every time, while I sat at the counter pretending to help. Most of the time, I just ended up eating the first one before it even made it to a plate. She always noticed, but she never said anything. She'd just smile like she expected it. Evenings were quieter. That was when my dad would usually come home. He worked long hours, longer than I ever fully understood back then. There were nights he didn't make it home until I was already in bed, and mornings when he left before I even woke up. But when he was there, he made an effort. He'd loosen his tie, drop his keys on the table, and sit down like he was finally allowed to breathe again. We always had dinner together when we could. My mom would ask about his day, I'd talk about school, and for a little while, everything felt balanced, safe. Like no matter what happened outside those walls, nothing could really touch us inside. I remember one night in particular. It had been raining all afternoon, the kind of steady, quiet rain that makes everything feel slower. The windows were fogged up, and the house felt warmer than usual. My mom had made soup, and we were all sitting around the table. Nothing special, just another normal evening. My dad looked tired, more than usual, but when my mom asked him something, I don't even remember what it was. He smiled. Not the polite kind, a real one, the kind that reached his eyes. And for a second, I remember thinking, this is it. This is what life is supposed to feel like. I didn't know how rare that moment actually was. At the time, I took everything for granted. The laughter, the conversations, the feeling that no matter what happened, I had somewhere to come back to. I never questioned it, never thought about what it would be like without it. Because why would I? Nothing in my world had ever given me a reason to believe it could disappear. My mom was healthy. My dad was strong. Our life, even with its small imperfections, felt stable in a way that made the future seem predictable. I thought I knew what was coming next. Graduation, a job, maybe moving out someday, but always staying connected. Always having that same home to return to. Looking back now, I can see how much of that confidence came from her. She was the glue holding everything together, even in ways I didn't notice at the time. The one who kept things from falling apart before they ever had the chance to. The one who made sure the house didn't just function, but felt like a place you wanted to be. And maybe that's why it hit so hard when she was gone. Because when she left, it wasn't just her absence I felt. It was everything she had been quietly holding together, starting to come undone. The day my mom died didn't feel real. It started like any other morning. There was nothing dramatic about it. No warning signs, no sense that anything was about to change. I remember waking up to the soft clinking of dishes in the kitchen and the faint smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. For a moment, everything felt exactly the way it always had. Safe, familiar. I almost didn't get out of bed right away. I lay there for a few extra minutes, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house, completely unaware that those sounds, those small, ordinary moments, were about to become something I'd spend years wishing I could hear again. When I finally walked into the kitchen, she was standing at the counter, just like always. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling around her face, and she had that same calm expression she always wore in the mornings. She looked normal, completely normal. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a small smile. There was nothing in her voice that hinted at what was coming. I remember sitting down, scrolling through my phone, barely paying attention as she moved around the kitchen. She asked me something. I don't even remember what it was, and I gave her a distracted answer. It was one of those forgettable conversations you assume you'll have 100 more times. That's the part that stayed with me the most. How ordinary it all was. Because just minutes later, everything changed. It happened so fast I didn't understand it at first. 1 second, she was standing there, reaching for something on the counter. And the next, there was a loud, sharp sound as something hit the floor. I looked up, and she was collapsing. At first, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. My mom didn't just fall. She didn't lose control like that. There had to be some explanation, something simple, but there wasn't. "Mom?" My voice sounded small, distant, like it wasn't even mine. She didn't answer. I remember the way my heart started racing, the way everything around me suddenly felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. I rushed to her side, my hands shaking as I tried to move her, to wake her up, to get any kind of response. Nothing. Her face looked different. Pale in a way I had never seen before. Her breathing, if it was even there, was shallow, uneven. That's when panic really hit. I grabbed my phone so fast I almost dropped it, my fingers slipping as I tried to dial. I don't even remember what I said when the operator answered. I just remember repeating the same words over and over, like if I said them enough times, someone would fix it. "They need to come now, please. Something's wrong." Everything after that felt like a blur. The sound of sirens, the front door opening, strangers moving through the house with a kind of urgency that made everything feel even more unreal. They spoke in short, sharp sentences, words I didn't fully understand but could feel the weight of anyway. I stood there, frozen, watching them work around her like I wasn't even in the room. At some point, they moved her onto a stretcher. I remember stepping back, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. I remember wanting to say something, to ask if she was going to be okay, but the words wouldn't come out. Because deep down, I already knew something was wrong. The hospital was worse. Bright lights, cold walls, the kind of environment that doesn't leave room for hope, no matter how hard you try to hold on to it. Everything moved too slowly and too fast at the same time. Nurses passing by, machines beeping, conversations happening just out of reach. I sat there, waiting. I don't know how long it was. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. When the doctor finally came in, I knew before he even spoke. There's a certain look people have when they're about to tell you something you're not ready to hear. And then he said it. A heart attack. Sudden. Severe. There was nothing they could do. Just like that. She was gone. No goodbye. No last words. No moment to prepare. One normal morning, and then nothing. I remember sitting there, staring at the floor, trying to understand how the world outside that room was still moving, how people were still talking, still walking, still living their lives like nothing had happened, because mine had just stopped. And in that moment, without even realizing it, everything I thought was stable, everything I thought would always be there, started to disappear. After my mom died, the house didn't feel like ours anymore. It was still the same place, the same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet street outside, but something essential was missing. The warmth she used to carry into every room was gone, and without it, everything felt hollow, like we were just moving through a space that used to mean something. For a while, it was just me and my dad trying to adjust to that silence. He worked even more than before, longer hours, fewer conversations. When he was home, he seemed distant, physically there, but mentally somewhere else. I didn't blame him. I knew he was hurting too. We just didn't know how to talk about it, so we didn't. We lived side by side, both pretending we were okay, both avoiding the one thing we should have been facing together. And then, just a few months later, everything shifted again. It started small. He mentioned her casually one evening, like it wasn't a big deal. Someone he had met through work. He didn't go into details, didn't seem particularly emotional about it, just matter of fact. I remember feeling something twist in my chest when he said her name. Not anger, not even jealousy, just confusion. It felt too soon, too fast. Like we hadn't even had time to process what we lost before something new was already trying to take its place. But I didn't say anything. I didn't feel like I had the right to. Over the next few weeks, her name started coming up more often. Then there were phone calls, late dinners, occasional mentions of meeting up again. Every time he talked about her, his tone changed slightly, lighter, almost relieved. And part of me understood that. He was lonely. He had lost his partner. Of course, he was searching for something to fill that space. But another part of me wasn't ready. Still, I kept quiet, because that's what I had learned to do. The first time I met her, she was exactly what you'd expect. Perfect. Her smile was warm, her voice was soft, and she looked at me like she genuinely cared. She complimented the house, asked about my school, even brought a small gift. Something simple, but thoughtful enough to make a good impression. If there were any warning signs that day, I didn't see them. Or maybe I didn't want to. Everything about her felt carefully put together, like she knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act. And my dad, he seemed happy, happier than I had seen him in months. That mattered to me. So I told myself it was okay. That maybe this was a good thing. Maybe we could find some kind of normal again. A few months later, they got married, just like that. No long engagement, no slow transition. One day, she was someone I had just met. And the next, she was living in our house, sitting at our table, sleeping in my mom's room. That was the first moment something didn't feel right. Not because she had done anything wrong, at least not openly, but because everything was happening too quickly, like decisions were being made without fully thinking about what they meant. She didn't move in alone. She had a son, around my age, maybe a little older. From the moment I met him, I could tell he was different. He wasn't polite, he wasn't warm, he didn't even pretend to be. There was a kind of casual arrogance in the way he carried himself, like he had already decided this place belonged to him before he even stepped inside. He barely acknowledged me that first day. Just a quick glance, a slight smirk, and then he looked away, like I wasn't worth his time. I told myself it didn't matter. We didn't have to be close. We just had to coexist. At first, things seemed normal enough. She continued playing the role she had introduced on that first day. Kind, attentive, always saying the right things at the right time. Around my dad, she was patient, supportive, almost perfect. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't quite match that image. A shift in her tone when he wasn't around. A look that lingered a second too long. A comment that felt just slightly off. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could point to and say, "This is wrong." Just enough to make me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe I was still grieving, still adjusting, still holding on to something that no longer existed. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The house felt different again, not empty this time, just unfamiliar. Like I was living in someone else's version of my life, and even though I couldn't explain it yet, I had a feeling it wasn't going to stay normal for very long. At first, it was subtle enough that I could almost convince myself it wasn't real. A shift in tone, a look that lingered a little too long, small comments that sounded harmless on the surface but carried something sharper underneath. It didn't happen all at once. It started the way these things usually do, quietly. The first time she asked me to do something, it didn't feel unusual. She called my name from the kitchen one afternoon while my dad was still at work, her voice soft but firm. "Emily, can you come here for a second?" I remember walking in, expecting something simple. Maybe she needed help with dinner. Maybe she just wanted to talk. Instead, she handed me a dish towel and pointed toward the sink. "Go ahead and finish these." There was something about the way she said it. Not a request, not even a suggestion. Just an expectation. I didn't argue. It didn't seem worth it. But that was how it began. From that day on, there was always something. Dishes, laundry, cleaning, organizing. It didn't matter what it was. If my dad wasn't home, it became my responsibility. At first, I tried to tell myself it was normal. Families share responsibilities. Helping out around the house isn't a big deal. But this wasn't that. This wasn't helping. This was being managed. There was no balance, no appreciation, no sense that I had a choice. and every time I hesitated, even for a second, her tone would change, softer but colder. "You live here, don't you?" she'd say, her voice almost calm. "Then you should act like it." I started noticing the pattern quickly. Around my dad, she was still the same person he had married, kind, patient, attentive. She'd ask me about my day, smile when I answered, even compliment me occasionally. If anyone else had been watching, they would have thought everything was perfectly normal. But the moment he left, everything shifted. Her voice dropped, her expressions hardened, and the warmth she showed in front of him disappeared completely. The first time she warned me not to say anything, it caught me off guard. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen, my hands still damp from the water, when she stepped closer than usual. Not aggressively, just enough to make me uncomfortable. "You don't need to mention any of this to your father," she said quietly. I blinked, confused. "Mention what?" Her lips curved into a small, controlled smile. "This," she said, gesturing lightly around the room. The little things, it would only stress him out. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. It didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a warning. I nodded anyway. What else was I supposed to do? That was the moment I stopped seeing it as temporary, because after that, it got worse. Her son didn't help. If anything, he made it more obvious. He had no interest in pretending, no effort to hide the way he saw me. To him, I wasn't part of the family. I was an inconvenience, something that needed to be dealt with. He'd leave his things everywhere, clothes on the floor, dishes in the sink, trash on the counter. And without fail, she would turn to me and expect me to clean it up. If I didn't move fast enough, he'd smirk. "Guess you missed a spot," he'd say, leaning back like he was watching a show. I learned quickly not to respond, because responding only made it worse. The house started to feel smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Every room felt like a place I had to be careful in. Every conversation felt like something I had to measure. I stopped spending time in the living room, stopped sitting at the kitchen table unless I had to. Even my own bedroom didn't feel like a safe space anymore, because they were always there, watching, waiting. And the more time passed, the more obvious their goal became. They weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to push me out. It showed in the little things. Comments about how I was old enough to be independent. Suggestions that maybe I should start thinking about moving out. Questions about whether I really needed to stay there anymore. All of it framed like concern, like advice. But none of it felt genuine. It felt strategic, calculated. Like they were slowly trying to make me believe that I didn't belong in my own home anymore. And the worst part was, my dad didn't see any of it. Or if he did, he didn't understand it the way I did. Because every time he was around, they changed. Her voice softened. Her son kept his distance. The house felt normal again. Just enough to make me question myself. Just enough to make me wonder if maybe I was overreacting. There were moments when I almost believed it. Moments when I told myself I just needed to be patient. That things would settle, that this was just an adjustment period, and eventually everything would find its balance. But deep down, I knew better. Because the pressure never stopped. If anything, it kept building. Every day felt heavier than the last. Every interaction felt more controlled, more deliberate. And then came the threats. Not loud, not obvious, quiet, direct. The kind you couldn't easily prove, but couldn't ignore either. "If your father knew how difficult you were being," she said one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper, "it would break his heart." I stared at her, confused. "I'm not—" She cut me off with a look. "You don't want to cause problems, do you?" I didn't answer, because I understood what she was really saying. Say something, and it gets worse. Stay quiet, and maybe it doesn't. So I stayed quiet. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed to get through it, that eventually something would change. I didn't realize at the time, something already was, and it was building toward a moment I wouldn't be able to ignore anymore. By the time it happened, I was already exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Not physically, though that was part of it, but mentally, emotionally. Living every day like you have to measure your words, your tone, even your breathing. It wears you down, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. That afternoon started like every other one. My dad had left early for work, barely finishing his coffee before heading out the door. She stood by the counter, smiling, telling him to have a good day, her voice light and supportive. He kissed her on the cheek before leaving, and for a moment, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Normal. But the second the door closed, the air changed. It always did. I was in my room when I heard her voice call out, sharp and deliberate. "Emily, come here." There was no softness in it this time, no pretense. I took a breath before stepping out into the hallway, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. She was standing near the bathroom, arms crossed, her expression flat. "Go clean it," she said, nodding toward the open door. I glanced inside. The floor was wet, streaked with something that smelled harsh and chemical. The sink was splattered, the mirror fogged over, and the entire space felt like it had been left that way on purpose, like it was waiting for me. "I cleaned it yesterday," I said carefully, keeping my voice low. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And it's dirty again," she replied. "So clean it." Something inside me tightened. I had done everything she asked, every chore, every demand, every silent order disguised as responsibility. I had stayed quiet, stayed out of the way, done everything I could to avoid conflict. But in that moment, something snapped. "I'm not cleaning it again," I said. The words felt unfamiliar the second they left my mouth. For a split second, there was silence. Then her expression changed, slowly, deliberately, like she had been waiting for this. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dropping into something colder than I had ever heard before. "I cleaned it yesterday," I repeated, my heart starting to pound. "It's not my mess." That was all it took. Her posture stiffened, her arms dropping to her sides as she took a step closer. Not fast, not aggressive, just controlled. "You live in this house," she said, her tone sharp now. "That makes it your responsibility." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "That's not—" Before I could finish, her voice cut through mine. "You don't get to decide what's yours and what isn't." The room felt smaller. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and uneven. I knew I should stop. I knew pushing back had never worked before, but I couldn't do it anymore. "I'm not your maid," I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. That was the moment everything changed. Her face hardened instantly, any trace of control slipping just enough to reveal something darker underneath. "Watch your tone," she snapped. "I'm just telling the truth," I replied, even though my hands were shaking. For a second, I thought she might yell, or threaten, or do what she always did, twist the situation just enough to make me question myself. But instead, she stepped closer, close enough that I could see the shift in her eyes. "Then maybe it's time you start remembering your place," she said quietly. The words hit harder than anything she had said before, not because they were louder, but because they weren't. And then she pointed toward the bathroom again. "Get on your knees," she said. Something inside me froze. I didn't move. I said, "Clean it," she repeated, her voice sharper now. "I'm not doing it," I said, barely above a whisper. That's when she lost it. Not in a loud, chaotic way, but in a controlled, deliberate one that felt even worse. She grabbed the cleaning supplies from the counter and shoved them into my hands, the force just enough to make me stumble back a step. "You think you have a choice?" she said, her voice low but filled with anger. "You don't get to refuse me in my own house." My chest tightened. "This is my house too," I said, the words shaking as they came out. Her lips curled slightly. "Not for long," she replied. The meaning behind those words settled in instantly. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about control. This was about pushing me out completely. Before I could respond, she stepped even closer, her voice dropping again. "And if you think telling your father will change anything," she said quietly, "you're wrong." My throat tightened, because part of me had started to believe that maybe he wouldn't see it, maybe he wouldn't understand, maybe nothing would change. And that thought scared me more than anything she had done. I looked down at the cleaning supplies in my hands. My fingers tightened around them. And slowly, I knelt down. The cold tile pressed against my knees as I started scrubbing, my movements mechanical, my thoughts racing. I hated it, every second of it. But I didn't know what else to do. Behind me, I could feel her watching, waiting, satisfied. A tear slipped down my cheek, hitting the floor and blending into the dirty water beneath my hands. And just when I thought this moment couldn't get any worse, I heard it. Footsteps, different from hers, heavier, familiar. Then the sound of a key turning in the front door. My breath caught, because he wasn't supposed to be home yet. The door opened. Silence filled the house. And in that exact moment, everything stopped. The front door clicked shut, and for a second, no one moved. My hands were still pressed against the cold tile, the rag clenched in my fingers, my knees aching against the floor. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, like if I moved too quickly, everything would collapse at once. Then I heard his voice. "Emily?" It was confused, careful, like he already knew something wasn't right. I froze. Behind me, I felt her shift, not in panic, but in calculation. I could almost hear it in the way she adjusted her tone before she spoke. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost surprised. "I didn't expect you back yet." I closed my eyes for a second. That voice, the same one she used every time he was around, the same calm, controlled version of herself that made everything look normal. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady as I pushed up from the floor. When I turned around, he was standing in the hallway, his eyes moving between us, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The bucket, the wet floor. Me. "Why are you on the floor?" he asked, his voice tightening slightly. Before I could answer, she stepped in. "Oh, it's nothing," she said quickly, walking toward him with a small, reassuring smile. She offered to help clean. I told her she didn't have to, but you know how she is. She likes to stay busy. The words were smooth, practiced. If I didn't know better, I might have believed them myself. I looked at her, then back at him. And for a moment, I hesitated, because this was the part she had trained me for. Stay quiet. Don't make problems. Don't say anything that could make things worse. My throat tightened. "Emily?" he said again, more firmly this time. I met his eyes, and something shifted. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt done. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Her head turned sharply toward me. "No?" she repeated, her tone still controlled, but tighter now. I swallowed, my hands still shaking slightly. "I didn't offer," I said, my voice unsteady but clear. "She told me to do it." The silence that followed felt different, not tense, sharp. My dad's expression changed almost immediately. Not completely, but enough for me to see it. Confusion turning into something else, something more focused. "That's not what happened," she said quickly, her smile fading just a fraction. "She's been stressed lately. I think she's just overwhelmed." I felt my chest tighten again, but this time I didn't back down. "That's not true," I said, louder now. Her eyes snapped to mine, a warning flashing across her face, but it didn't stop me. "She makes me clean everything," I continued, the words coming faster now. "Every day, when you're not here. She tells me not to say anything to you. Emily, she started, her tone sharp. No, I cut in, my voice shaking but stronger than before. I'm not doing this anymore. The room went completely still. My dad looked between us again, his jaw tightening slightly. Is that true? He asked, his voice low now, but different. Serious. She let out a small breath, like she was trying to stay calm. She's exaggerating, she said. I've asked her to help out, yes, but that's normal. She's making it sound like something it's not. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped forward slightly, his eyes scanning the room again. The floor, the supplies, me. Then he looked at her. Did you tell her not to talk to me about it? There was a pause, a small one, but long enough to matter. I just didn't want to stress you, she said finally, her tone softer now. You've been working so much. I thought it would be better if we handled things in the house without adding more pressure. It sounded reasonable, almost convincing. But something had already shifted. I could see it in his face, the doubt, the realization. Because for the first time, the version of her he had been seeing didn't quite match what was in front of him anymore. And her son, I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. He leaves everything for me to clean, I continued. He doesn't even try. And she lets him. Her expression hardened again. That's not enough, my dad said sharply. The word cut through the room instantly. She stopped. So did I. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he took a slow breath, running a hand over his face like he was trying to process everything at once. When did this start? He asked, not looking at her this time. At the beginning, I said quietly. His hand dropped slightly, and just like that, I saw it. The moment it fully hit him, the realization that this hadn't been a misunderstanding, it hadn't been recent, it had been happening right in front of him, and he hadn't seen it. His expression changed again, this time completely. The confusion was gone, replaced by something much heavier, anger, and underneath it, guilt. He looked at her one last time, and whatever he saw in that moment was enough. The silence didn't last long. It never does when the truth finally surfaces. My dad stood there for a moment, completely still, like he was trying to hold everything together before it slipped out of control. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening in a way I had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something sharp. Go upstairs, he said without looking at me. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to listen, but because I had never heard that tone from him before. Now, Emily. I nodded and stepped back, my heart still racing as I moved toward the hallway. But I didn't go far. I stopped just out of sight, close enough to hear everything. Because for the first time, I needed to. What exactly has been going on in this house? He asked. There was no softness in his voice anymore, no confusion, just a direct, controlled anger that filled the space between them. She let out a quiet breath, like she was preparing herself. You're overreacting, she said carefully. She's upset, she's grieving. Don't, he cut in immediately. The word hit hard. I'm not asking you to explain her, he continued. I'm asking you to explain yourself. There was a pause. A longer one this time. I've done nothing wrong, she said finally, her voice tighter now. I've been trying to keep this house running while you've been working nonstop. If she chooses to see that as something else, that's not my fault. My dad let out a short, humorless breath. Nothing wrong, he repeated. I could hear the shift in his tone now. The anger wasn't just there anymore, it was building. She was on her knees scrubbing the floor, he said. You told me she offered. She says you forced her. She's twisting things, she snapped. Am I? I heard myself say quietly from the hallway. I hadn't meant to speak. It just came out. Both of them turned toward me. Emily, my dad said, his voice softer now, but still firm. Go upstairs. This time I listened, but I didn't miss what came next. Because the moment I stepped away, the argument changed. It got louder, sharper. Her voice rose first, defensive, frustrated. Then his followed, not louder, but heavier. Every word more controlled, more deliberate. You lied to me, he said. I didn't lie. You made me believe everything was fine. I was trying to protect you. From what? The truth? Silence. Then something hit the floor downstairs. A glass, maybe. I flinched at the sound, my heart jumping into my throat. You don't get to decide what I should and shouldn't know about my own daughter, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. She's not a child anymore, she shot back. She should be contributing. She is my daughter, he interrupted. Not your responsibility to control, not your problem to manage. Another silence. This one heavier than the last. And then something shifted again. I didn't hear the exact moment it happened, but I felt it. The point where this stopped being an argument and turned into a decision. The rest of the night passed in fragments, doors opening and closing, raised voices fading into quiet conversations, the sound of movement downstairs that didn't feel normal anymore. At some point, my dad came upstairs. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, my hands still shaking slightly, when he knocked softly on the door. Can I come in? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. When he walked in, he looked different. Not just angry, but tired. Like everything he had just realized was finally catching up to him. He sat down across from me, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The words hit harder than I expected. I should have seen it, he continued. I should have paid more attention. I thought things were okay. I didn't know what to say, because part of me was still processing everything that had just happened. You don't have to go through this anymore, he said after a moment. I looked up at him. What do you mean? His expression hardened slightly, but this time it wasn't anger. It was resolve. I've already spoken to a lawyer, he said. This ends now. The words settled slowly. Divorce. It wasn't just an argument. It wasn't something that would pass in a few days. This was final. And her son? I asked quietly. They're both leaving, he replied. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just certainty. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, just lighter. For the first time in months, I woke up without that tight feeling in my chest, without the instinct to stay still and listen before getting out of bed. There were no raised voices, no tension sitting in the walls, no sense that I needed to prepare myself for something the second I stepped outside my room. Just silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. They were gone. It didn't happen all at once, but it happened fast enough that it almost felt unreal. Within a couple of days, most of their things had disappeared. The rooms they used to occupy looked empty, like they had never fully belonged there in the first place. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no long conversations, just a quiet, final exit that closed a chapter I had been trapped in for far too long. At first, I didn't know what to do with that. When you spend so much time living in survival mode, you don't immediately know how to relax when the pressure is gone. Your body doesn't trust it right away. It keeps expecting something to happen. For a few days, I caught myself hesitating before leaving my room, pausing before speaking, even listening for footsteps that weren't there anymore. But slowly, that started to fade. Little by little, the house began to feel like ours again. My dad and I didn't fix everything overnight. That wasn't possible. There was too much that had gone unsaid, too much distance that had built up between us without either of us realizing it. But we tried. That was the difference. We started with small things. Dinner together again. Not rushed, not distracted, just sitting at the table like we used to, even if the conversations were a little awkward at first. Sometimes we didn't say much. Sometimes we said too much. But either way, we stayed. And that mattered. One evening, a few weeks after everything happened, he sat across from me in the kitchen, his expression quieter than usual. "I keep thinking about how I missed it," he said. I looked up from my plate. "I was right there," he continued, "and I didn't see what was happening to you." I could hear the weight in his voice, the guilt he hadn't been able to shake. "It's not your fault," I said gently. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. He shook his head slightly. "I should have noticed," he said. "You shouldn't have had to deal with that alone." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, because part of me had been angry, not at him directly, but at the situation, at the fact that I had felt so invisible for so long. But sitting there, looking at him now, I could see it. He wasn't the same person who had missed it. He was someone who understood now, and that changed everything. "I didn't want to make things harder for you," I admitted quietly. "You were already dealing with so much." He leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath. "That doesn't mean you had to carry it by yourself," he said. The words stayed with me longer than I expected, because he was right. We had both been trying to protect each other, and somehow that had created distance instead of connection. After that, things started to shift more naturally. We talked more, not just about what had happened, but about everything. Small things, normal things, the kind of conversations we used to have before everything changed. The house started to feel alive again. Not exactly the way it had been before, because some things don't go back to what they were, but close enough to remind me that we weren't broken. Just rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were moving forward instead of just holding on. A year later, everything looked different. Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but in the quiet, steady kind of way that actually lasts. The kind of change you don't notice all at once, until one day you stop and realize your life doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels yours. By then, I had finished everything I needed to finish and stepped into something new. A job I had worked hard for. Not just something to get by, but something that gave me independence, stability, control over my own life in a way I had never truly experienced before. It wasn't easy getting there. There were long nights, moments of doubt, and days when I questioned whether I was ready for it. But every step forward felt like proof of something I had slowly started to believe again, that I wasn't stuck anymore, that I could build something for myself. And I did. My routine changed completely. Mornings were no longer rushed or tense. They were calm, structured, predictable in the best way. I had somewhere to be, something to focus on, a direction that felt solid under my feet. But more than that, I had peace, real peace. At home, things had settled into something steady again. Not the same as before, but strong in a different way. My dad had changed too. He wasn't buried in work the way he used to be. He still worked, of course, but there was a balance now. He was present, actually present. The kind of presence you don't have to question. We had rebuilt something real between us, not based on assumptions or silence, but on understanding, on honesty. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, the same one that had once felt so unfamiliar, now filled with a quiet sense of comfort. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, soft and warm, settling into the space like it belonged there again. He looked over at me, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You've done a lot this year," he said. I smiled slightly, not quite sure how to respond to that. "So have you," I replied. He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Not like you," he said. "You turned everything around." For a moment, I didn't say anything, because a year ago, I wouldn't have believed that was possible. But now it felt real. "I had to," I said finally. I didn't want to stay stuck in what happened. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he needed to say. There was a pause, comfortable this time. And then I looked at him, really looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion that had softened over time, at the way he seemed lighter now, like something heavy had finally been lifted. "You don't have to work so hard anymore," I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean it," I continued. "You've done enough, for me, for everything." He leaned back a little, studying me carefully. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. I smiled, a little more confidently this time. "I've got this now," I said. "Let me take care of things for a while." The words felt natural, not forced, not dramatic, just true. For a second, he didn't respond. Then he nodded slowly, like he was letting the idea settle in. "I guess you really did grow up," he said quietly. I let out a small breath, a soft laugh following it. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I did." But it wasn't just about growing up. It was about taking control, about not letting the past define what came next, about choosing to move forward, even when it would have been easier to stay where I was. And as I sat there, in a home that finally felt like mine again, with a future that no longer felt uncertain, I realized something simple. Everything we lost didn't break us. It forced us to rebuild, stronger, wiser. And this time, nothing was going to take that away. If this story hit you, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent or fought back sooner? Your thoughts matter more than you think. Drop them in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because the next one might be even more intense.